All right, chapter 30. Zaphod Beeblebrox crawled bravely along the tunnel, like the hell of a guy he was. He was very confused, but continued crawling doggedly anyway because he was that brave. He was confused by something he had just seen, but not half as confused as he was going to be by something he was about to hear. So it would be best at this point to explain exactly where he was. He was in the robot war zones, many miles above the surface of the planet Cricket. The atmosphere was thin here, and relatively unprotected from any rays or anything that space might care to hurl in its direction. He had parked the starship Heart of Gold among the huge jostling dim hulks that crowded the sky here above Cricket. He had entered what appeared to be the biggest and most important of the sky buildings, armed with nothing but a zap gun and something for his headaches. He had found himself in a long, wide, and badly lit corridor, in which he was able to hide until he worked out what he was going to do next. He hid because every now and then one of the Cricket robots would walk along, and although he had so far led some kind of charmed life at their hands, it had nevertheless been an extremely painful one, and he had no desire to stretch what he was only half inclined to call his good fortune. He had ducked at one point into a room leading off the corridor and had discovered it to be a huge and again dimly lit chamber. In fact, it was a museum with just one exhibit, the wreckage of a spacecraft. It was terribly burnt and mangled, and now that he had caught up with some of the galactic history he had missed through his failed attempts to have sex with the girl in the cybercule next to him at school, he was able to put in an intelligent guess that this was the wrecked spaceship that had drifted through the dust cloud all those billions of years ago and started this whole business off. But, and this is where he had become confused, there was something not at all right about it. It was genuinely wrecked. It was genuinely burnt, but a fairly brief inspection by an experienced eye revealed that it was not a genuine spacecraft. It was as if it were a full-scale model of one, a solid blueprint. In other words, it was a very useful thing to have around if you suddenly decided to build a spaceship yourself and didn't know how to do it. It was not, however, anything that would ever fly anywhere itself. He was still puzzling over this. In fact, he'd only just started to puzzle over it when he became aware that a door had slid open in another part of the chamber, and another couple of Cricket robots had entered, looking a little glum. Zepha did not want to tangle with them, and decided that just as direction was the better part of valor, as discretion was the better part of valor, so was cowardice the better part of discretion. He valiantly hid himself in a closet. The closet, in fact, turned out to be the top part of a shaft that led down through an inspection hatch into a wide ventilation tunnel. He let himself down into it and started to crawl along it. He didn't like it. It was cold, dark, and profoundly uncomfortable, and it frightened him. And at the first opportunity, which was another shaft 100 yards farther along, he climbed back up out of it. This time he emerged into a smaller chamber, which appeared to be a computer intelligence center. He emerged in the dark, narrow space between the large computer bank and the wall. He quickly learned that he was not alone in the chamber and started to leave again, when he began to listen with interest to what the other occupants were saying. "It's the robots, sir," said one voice. "There's something wrong with them." "What exactly?" These were the voices of two War Command cricketers. All the War Commanders lived up in the sky in the robot war zones, and were largely immune to the whimsical doubts and uncertainties that were afflicting their fellows down on the surface of the planet. "Well, sir, I think it's just as well that they are being phased out of the war effort, and that we are now going to detonate a supernova bomb. In the very short time since were released from the envelope." "Get to the point." "The robots aren't enjoying it, sir." "What?" "The war, sir. It seems to be getting them down. There's a certain world wariness about them, or perhaps I should say universe wariness." "Well, that's all right. They're meant to be helping to destroy it." "Yes, well, they're finding it difficult, sir. They are afflicted with a certain lassitude. They're just finding it hard to get behind the job. They lack oomph." "What are you trying to say?" "Well, I think they're very depressed about something, sir." "What on cricket are you talking about?" "Well, in the few skirmishes they've had recently, it seems that they go into battle, raise their weapons to fire, and suddenly think, why bother? What, cosmically speaking, is it all about? And they just seem to get a little tired and a little grim." And then what do they do? Er, quadratic equations mostly, sir. Fiendishly difficult ones by all accounts. And then they sulk. Sulk? Yes, sir. Who ever heard of a robot sulking? I don't know, sir. What was that noise? It was the noise of Zaphod leaving with his heads spinning. Chapter 31. In a deep well of darkness, a crippled robot sat. It had been silent in its metallic darkness for some time. It was cold and damp, but being a robot, it was supposed not to be able to notice these things. With an enormous effort of will, however, it did manage to notice them. Its brain had been harnessed to the central intelligence core of the Cricket war computer. It was enjoying the experience, and neither was the It wasn't enjoying the experience, and neither was the central intelligence core of the Cricket war computer. The Cricket robots, who had salvaged this pathetic metal creature from the swamps of Squarnchelius Zeta, had done so because they had recognized almost immediately its gigantic intelligence and the use this could be to them. They hadn't reckoned with the attendant personality disorders, which the coldness, the darkness, the dampness, the crampedness, and the loneliness were doing nothing to decrease. It was not happy with its task. Apart from anything else, the mere coordination of an entire planet's military strategy was only taking up a tiny part of its formidable mind, and the rest of it had become extremely bored. Having solved all the major mathematical, physical, chemical, biological, sociological, philosophical, etymological, meteorological, and psychological problems of the universe, except his own, 3 times over, he was severely struck for something to do, and had taken up composing short, dolorous ditties of no tune or indeed tune. Of indeed no note or indeed tune. The latest was a lullaby. Marvin droned. Now the world has gone to bed. Darkness won't engulf my head. I can see by infrared how I hate the night. He paused to gather the artistic and emotional strength to tackle the next verse. Now I lay me down to sleep. Try to count electric sheep. Sweet dream wishes you can keep. How I hate the night. Marvin, hissed a voice. His head snapped up, almost dislodging the intricate network of electrodes that connected him to the central Cricket war computer. An inspection hatch had opened, and one of a pair of unruly heads was peering through while the other kept on jogging it by continually darting to look this way and that extremely nervously. Oh, it's you, muttered the robot. I might have known. Hey, kid, said Zaphod in astonishment. Was that you singing just then? I am, Marvin acknowledged bitterly, in particularly scintillating form at the moment. Zaphod poked his head in through the hatchway and looked around. Are you alone? He asked. Yes, said Marvin. Warily I sit here, pain and misery my only companions, and vast intelligence, of course, and infinite sorrow. And yeah, said Zaphod. Hey, what's your connection with all this? This, said Marvin, indicating with his less damaged arm all the electrodes and connections that connected him with the Cricket computer. Then, said Zaphod awkwardly, I guess you must have saved my life. Twice. 3 times, said Marvin. Zaphod's head snapped around. His other one was looking hawkishly in entirely the wrong direction, just in time to see the lethal killer robot directly behind him seize up and start to smoke. It staggered backward and slumped against the wall. It slid down it. It slipped sideways, threw its head back, and started to sob inconsolably. Zaphod looked back at Marvin. You must have a terrific outlook on life, he said. Just don't even ask, said Marvin. I won't, said Zaphod, and didn't. Hey, look, he added, you're doing a terrific job. Which means, I suppose, said Marvin, and requiring only 1/10,000 million trillionth gillionth part of his mental powers to make this particular logical leap, that you are not going to release me or anything like that. Kid, you know I'd love to, but you're not going to. No, I see. You're working well. Yes, said Marvin. Why stop now, just when I'm hating it? I have to go find Trillian and the guys. Hey, you any idea where they are? I mean, I just got a planet to choose from. Could take a while. They are very close, said Marvin dolefully. You can monitor them from here if you like. I better go get them, asserted Zaphod, or maybe they need some help, right? Maybe, said Marvin with unexpected authority in his lugubrious voice. It would be better if you monitored them from here. That young girl, he added unexpectedly, is one of the least benignantly intelligent organic life forms. It has been my profound lack of pleasure not to be able to avoid meeting. Zaphod took a moment or two to find his way through this labyrinth string of negatives and emerged at the other end with surprise. Trillian? He said. She's just a kid. Cute, yeah, but temperamental. You know how it is with women, or perhaps you don't. I assume you don't. If you do, I don't want to hear about it. Plug us in. Totally manipulated. What? Said Zaphod. Oh, totally manipulated. What? Said Zaphod. It was Trillian speaking. He turned around. The wall against which the cricket robot was sobbing had lit up to reveal a scene taking place in some other unknown part of the cricket robot war zones. It seemed to be a council chamber of some kind. Zaphod couldn't make it out too clearly because of the robot slumped against the screen. He tried to move the robot, but it was heavy with its grief and tried to bite him, so he just looked around it as best he could. Just think about it, said Trillian's voice. Your history is just a series of freakishly improbable events. And I know an improbable event when I see one. Your complete isolation from the galaxy was freakish for a start, right out on the very edge of a dust cloud around you. It's a setup, obviously. Zaphod was mad with frustration that he couldn't see the screen. The robot's head was obscuring his view of the people Trillian was talking to. Its multifunctional battle club was obscuring the background, and the elbow of the arm it had pressed tragically against its brow was obscuring Trillian herself. Then, said Trillian, this spaceship that crash landed on your planet, that's really likely, isn't it? Have you any idea what the odds are against a drifting spaceship accidentally intersecting with the orbit of a planet? Hey, said Zaphod. She doesn't know what the Zark she's talking about. I've seen that spaceship. It's a fake. No deal. I thought it might be, said Marvin from his prison behind Zaphod. Oh yeah, said Zaphod. It's easy for you to say that. I just told you. Anyway, I don't see what it's got to do with anything. And especially, continued Trillian, the odds against its intersecting with the orbit of the one planet in the galaxy or with the whole of the universe, as far as I know, would be totally staggering. You don't know what the odds are, nor do I. They're that big, and again, it's a setup. I wouldn't be surprised if that spaceship was just a fake. Zaphod managed to move the robot's battle club. Behind it on the screen were the figures of Ford, Arthur, and Slarty Bartfast, who appeared astonished and bewildered by the whole thing. Hey, look, said Zaphod excitedly. The guys are doing great. Rah, rah, rah. Go get them, guys. And what about, said Trillian, all this technology you suddenly managed to build for yourselves almost overnight? Most people would take thousands of years to do all that. Someone was feeding you what you needed to know. Someone was keeping you at it. I know, she added in response to some unseen interjection. I know you didn't realize it was going on. That is exactly my point. You never realized anything at all, like this supernova bomb. How did you know about that? Said an unseen voice. I just know, said Trillian. You expect me to believe that you are bright enough to invent something that brilliant and be too dumb to realize it would take you with it as well? That's not just stupid, that is spectacularly obtuse. Hey, what is this bomb thing? Said Zaphod with alarm to Marvin. The supernova bomb? Said Marvin. It's a very, very small bomb. Yeah? That would destroy the universe completely, added Marvin. Good idea, if you ask me. They won't get it to work, though. Why not, if it's so brilliant? It's brilliant, said Marvin. They're not. They've got as far as designing it before they were locked in the envelope. They've spent the last 5 years building it. They think they've got it right, but they haven't. They're as stupid as any other organic life form. I hate them. Trillian was continuing. Zaphod tried to pull the cricket robot away by its leg, but it kicked and growled at him, then quaked with a fresh outburst of sobbing. Then suddenly it slumped over and continued to express its feelings out of everybody's way on the floor. Trillian was standing alone In the middle of a chamber, tired, tired but with fiercely burning eyes. Ranged in front of her were the pale-faced and wrinkled elder masters of cricket, motionless behind their widely curved control desks, staring at her with helpless fear and hatred. In front of them, equidistant between their control desk and the middle of the chamber, where Trillian stood, as if on trial, was a slim white pillar about 4 feet tall. On top of it stood a small white globe, about 3, maybe 4 inches in diameter. Beside it stood a cricket robot with its multifunctional battle club. In fact, exclaimed Trillian, you are so dumb stupid. She was sweating. Zaphod felt that this was an unattractive thing for her to be doing at this point. You are all so dumb stupid that I very much doubt, if you've been able to build the bomb properly without any help from Hector for the last 5 years. Who's this guy Hector? Said Zaphod, squaring his shoulders. If Marvin replied, Zaphod didn't hear him. All his attention was concentrated on the screen. One of the elders of cricket made a small motion with his hand toward the cricket robot. The robot raised its club. There's nothing I can do, said Marvin. It's on an independent circuit from the others. Wait, said Trillian. The elder made a small motion. The robot halted. Trillian suddenly seemed very doubtful of her own judgment. How do you know all this? Said Zaphod to Marvin at this point. Computer records, said Marvin. I have access. You're very different, aren't you? Said Trillian to the elders, from your fellow worldling down on the ground. You've spent all your lives up here, unprotected by the atmosphere. You've been vulnerable. The rest of your race is frightened. You know, they don't want you to do this. You're out of touch. Why don't you check up? The cricket elder grew impatient. He made a gesture to the robot that was precisely the opposite of the gesture he had last made to it. The robot swung its battle club. It hit the small white globe. The small white globe was the supernova bomb. It was a very, very small bomb that was designed to bring the entire universe to an end. The supernova bomb flew through the air. It hit the back wall of the council chamber and dented it very badly. So how does she know all this? Said Zaphod. Marvin kept a sullen silence. Probably just bluffing, said Zaphod. Poor kid. I should never have left her alone. Chapter 32. Hector, called Trillian. What are you up to? There was no reply from the enclosing darkness. Trillian waited nervously. She was sure she couldn't be wrong. She peered into the gloom from which she had been expecting some kind of response, but there was only cold silence. Hector? She called again. I would like you to meet my friend Arthur Dent. I wanted to go off with Thunder God, but he wouldn't let me, and I appreciate that. He made me realize where my affections really lay. Unfortunately, Zaphod is too frightened by all this, so I brought Arthur instead. I'm not sure why I'm telling you all this. Hello? She said again. Hector? And then it came. It was thin and feeble, like a voice carried on the wind from a great distance, half heard, a memory or a dream of a voice. Won't you both come out? Said the voice. I promise that you will be perfectly safe. They glanced at each other and then stepped out, improbably, along the shaft of light that streamed out of the open hatchway of the Heart of Gold, into the dim, granular darkness of the dust cloud. Arthur tried to hold her hand to steady and reassure her, but she wouldn't let him. He held on to his airline bag with its tin of Greek olive oil, its towel, its crumpled postcards of Santori, and its other odds and ends. He steadied and reassured that instead. They were standing on and in nothing. Murky, dusty nothing. Each grain of dust of the pulverized computer sparkled dimly as it turned and twisted slowly, catching the sunlight in the darkness. Each particle of the computer, each speck of dust held within itself, faintly and weakly, the pattern of the whole. In reducing the computer to dust, the celastic armor feeds of Stryteryx had merely crippled the computer, not killed it. A weak and insubstantial field held the particles in slight relationship with each other. Arthur and Trillian stood, or rather floated, in the middle of this bizarre entity. They had nothing to breathe, but for the moment this seemed not to matter. Hector kept his promise. They were safe. For the moment. I have nothing to offer you by way of hospitality, said Hector faintly, but tricks of the light. It is possible to be comforted with tricks of the light, though, if that is all you have. His voice evanesced, and in the dark, a long velvet paisley-covered sofa coalesced into hazy shape. Arthur could hardly bear the fact that this was the same sofa that had appeared to him in the fields of prehistoric Earth. He wanted to shout and shake with rage that the universe kept doing these insanely bewildering things to him. He let this feeling subside and then sat on the sofa, carefully. Trillian sat on it too. It was real. At least, if it wasn't real, it did support them. And as that is what sofas are supposed to do, this, by any test that mattered, was a real sofa. The voice on the solar wind breathed to them again. I hope you are comfortable, it said. They nodded. And I would like to congratulate you on the accuracy of your deductions. Arthur quickly pointed out that he hadn't deduced anything much himself. Trillian was the one. She had simply asked him along because he was interested in life, the universe, and everything. That is something in which I, too, am interested, breathed Hector. Well, said Arthur, we should have a chat about it sometime, over a cup of tea. There slowly materialized in front of them a small wooden table on which sat a silver teapot, a bone china milk jug, a bone china sugar bowl, and two bone china cups and saucers. Arthur reached forward, but they were just a trick of the light. He leaned back on the sofa, which was an illusion his body was prepared to accept as comfortable. Why, said Trillian, do you feel you have to destroy the universe? She found it a little difficult talking into nothingness, with nothing on which to focus. Hector obviously noticed this. He chuckled a ghostly chuckle. If it's going to be that sort of session, he said, we may as well have the right sort of setting. And now there materialized in front of them something new. It was the dim, hazy image of a couch, a psychiatrist's couch. The leather with which it was upholstered was shiny and sumptuous, but again, it was only a trick of the light. Around them, to complete the setting, was the hazy suggestions of wood-paneled walls, and then on the couch appeared the image of Hector himself, and it was an eye-twisting image. The couch looked normal-sized for a psychiatrist's couch, about 5 or 6 feet long. The computer looked normal-sized for the black space-borne computer satellite, about 1,000 miles across. The illusion that the one was sitting on top of the other was the thing that made the eye twist. All right, said Trillian firmly. She stood up from the sofa. She felt that she was being asked to feel too comfortable and to accept too many illusions. Very good, she said. Can you construct real things too? I mean solid objects? Again, there was a pause before the answer, as if the pulverized mind of Hector had to collect its thoughts from the millions and millions of miles over which it was scattered. Ah, he sighed. You are thinking of the spaceship. Thoughts seemed to drift by them and through them, like waves through the ether. Yes, he acknowledged, I can. But it takes enormous effort and time. All I can do in my particle state, you see, is encourage and suggest. Encourage and suggest. And suggest. The image of Hector on the couch seemed to billow and waver, as if finding it hard to maintain itself. It gathered new strength. I can encourage and suggest, it said, tiny pieces of space debris, the odd, minute meteor, a few molecules here, a few hydrogen atoms there, to move together. I encourage them together. I can tease them into shape, but it takes many eons. So, did you make, asked Trillian again, the model of the wrecked spacecraft? Yes, murmured Hector. I have made a few things. I can move them about. I made the spacecraft. It seemed best to do. Something at this point made Arthur pick up his tote bag from where he had left it on the sofa and grasp it tightly. The mist of Hector's ancient, shattered mind swirled about them as if uneasy dreams were moving through it. I repented, you see, he murmured dolefully. I repented of sabotaging my own design for the scholastic armor fiends. It was not my place to make such decisions. I was created to fulfill a function, and I failed in it. I negated my own existence. Hector sighed, and they waited in silence for him to continue his story. You were right, he said at length. I deliberately nurtured the planet of cricket till they would arrive at the same state of mind as the scholastic armor fiends, and require of me the design of the bomb I failed to make the first time. I wrapped myself around the planet and coddled it. Under the influence of events I was able to engineer, and influences I was able to generate, they learned to hate like maniacs. I had to make them live in the sky. On the ground, my influences were too weak. Without me, of course, when they were locked away from me in the envelope of slow time, their responses became very confused, and they were unable to manage. Ah well, he added. I was only trying to fulfill my function. And very gradually, very, very slowly, the images of the cloud began to fade, gently to melt away. And then suddenly they stopped fading. There was also the matter of revenge, of course, said Hector, with a sharpness that was new in his voice. Remember, he said, that I was pulverized and then left in a crippled and semi-impotent state for billions of years. I honestly would rather like to wipe out the universe. You would feel the same way, believe me. He paused again as eddies swept through the dust. But primarily, he said in his former wistful tone, I was trying to fulfill my function. Ah, well, Trillian said. Does it worry you that you have failed? Have I failed? Whispered Hector. The image of the computer on the psychiatrist's couch began slowly to fade again. Ah, well, the voice intoned again. No, failure doesn't bother me now. You know what we have to do, said Trillian, her voice cold and businesslike. Yes, said Hector, you're going to disperse me. You're going to destroy my consciousness. Please be my guest. After all these eons, oblivion is all I crave. If I haven't already fulfilled my function, then it's too late now. Thank you and good night. The sofa vanished, the tea table vanished, the couch and the computer vanished, the walls were gone. Arthur and Trillian made their cautious way back into the heart of gold. Well, that, said Arthur, would appear to be that. The flames danced higher in front of him and then subsided. A few last licks and they were gone, leaving him with just a pile of ashes, where a few minutes previously there had been the wooden pillar of nature and spirituality. He scooped them off the hob of the Heart of Gold's Gamma barbecue, put them in a paper bag, and walked back onto the bridge. I think we should take them back, he said. I feel very strongly. He had already had an argument with Slarty Bartfast on this matter, and eventually the old man had got annoyed and left. He had returned to his own spaceship, the Bistromath, had a furious row with the waiter, and disappeared off into an entirely subjective idea of what space was. The argument had arisen because Arthur's idea of returning the ashes to Lord's cricket ground at the same moment they were originally taken would involve traveling back in time a day or so, and this was precisely the sort of gratuitous and irresponsible mucking about with the campaign for real time that the campaign for real time was trying to put a stop to. Yes, Arthur had said, but you try and explain that to the MCC, and would hear no more against the idea. I think he said again, and stopped. The reason he started to say it again was that no one had listened to him the first time, and the reason he stopped was that it looked fairly clear that no one was going to listen to him this time either. Ford, Zaphod, and Trillian were watching the visiscreen intently. Hector was disappearing under pressure from a vibration field which the Heart of Gold was pumping into it. What did you say? asked Ford. Oh, what did it say? asked Ford. I thought I heard it say, said Trillian in a puzzled voice. What's done is done. I have fulfilled my function. I think we should take these back, said Arthur, holding up the bag containing the ashes. I feel that very strongly. Chapter 33. The sun was shining calmly on a scene of complete havoc. Smoke was still billowing across the burnt grass in the wake of the theft of the ashes by the cricket robots. Through the smoke, people were running, panic-stricken, colliding with each other, tripping over stretchers, being arrested. One policeman was attempting to arrest Wowbanger, the infinitely prolonged, for insulting behavior, but was unable to prevent the tall gray aliens from returning to his ship. The tall green alien, from returning to his ship and arrogantly flying away, thus causing even more panic and pandemonium. In the middle of this suddenly materialized for the second time that afternoon the figures of Arthur Dent and Ford Prefect, who had teleported down out of the Heart of Gold, which was now in parking orbit around the planet. I can explain, shouted Arthur. I have the ashes. They're in this bag. I don't think you have their attention, said Ford. I have also helped save the universe, called Arthur to anyone who was prepared to listen. In other words, no one. That should have been a crowd stopper, said Arthur to Ford. It wasn't, said Ford. Arthur accosted a policeman who was running past. Excuse me, he said. The ashes. I've got them. They were stolen by these white robots a moment ago. I've got them in this bag. They were part of the key to the slow time envelope, you see. And well, anyway, you can guess the rest. The point is, I've got them. And what should I do with them? The policeman told him, but Arthur could only assume that he was speaking metaphorically. He wandered about disconsolately. Is no one interested? He shouted. A man rushed past him and jogged his elbow. He dropped the paper bag and it spilled its contents all over the ground. Arthur stared down at it with a tight-set mouth. Ford looked at him. Want to go now? He said. Arthur heaved a heavy sigh. He looked around at the planet Earth for what he was now certain would be the last time. Okay, he said. At that moment, he caught sight, through the clearing smoke, of one of the wickets, still standing in spite of everything. Hold on a moment, he said to Ford. When I was a boy, can you tell me later? I had a passion for cricket, you know, but I wasn't very good at it. Or not at all, if you prefer. And I always dreamed, rather stupidly, that one day I would bowl at Lord's. He looked around him at the panic-stricken throng. No one was going to mind very much. Okay, said Ford warily. Get it over with. I shall be over there, he added, being bored. He went and sat down on a patch of smoking grass. Arthur remembered that on their first visit there that afternoon, the cricket ball had actually landed in his bag, and he looked through the bag. He had already found the ball in it before he remembered that it wasn't the same bag he had had at the time. Still, there it was among the souvenirs from Greece. He took it out and polished it against his hip, spat on it, and polished it again. He put the bag down. He was going to do this properly. He tossed the small, hard red ball from hand to hand, feeling its weight. With a wonderful feeling of lightness and unconcern, he trotted off away from the wicket. A medium-fast pace, he decided, and measured a good long run-up. He looked up into the sky. The birds were wheeling about it. A few white clouds scuttled across it. The air was disturbed with the sound of police and ambulance sirens, people screaming and yelling. But he felt curiously happy and untouched by it all. He was going to bowl a ball at the Lord's. He turned and pawed a couple of times at the ground with his bedroom slippers. He squared his shoulders, tossed the ball in the air, and caught it again. He started to run. As he ran, he suddenly saw that standing at the wicket was a batsman. Oh, good, he thought. That should add a little. Then, as his running feet took him nearer, he saw more clearly. The batsman was standing ready at the wicket. Was not one of the England cricket team. He was not one of the Australian cricket team. He was one of the robot cricket team. It was a cold, hard, lethal white killer robot that presumably had not returned to its ship with the others. Quite a few thoughts collided in Arthur Dent's mind at this moment, but he didn't seem to be able to stop running. Time suddenly seemed to be going terribly, terribly slowly. But still, he didn't seem to be able to stop running. Moving as if through syrup, he slowly turned his troubled head and looked at his own hand, the hand that was holding the small, hard red ball. His feet were pounding slowly onward, unstoppably, as he stared at the ball gripped in his helpless hand. It was emitting a deep red glow and flashing intermittently, and still his feet were pounding inexorably forward. He looked at the cricket robot again, standing implacably still and purposeful in front of him. Battle club raised in readiness. Its eyes were burning with a deep, cold, fascinating light, and Arthur could not move his own eyes away from them. He seemed to be looking down a tunnel at them. Nothing on either side seemed to exist. Some of the thoughts that were colliding in his mind at the time were these. He felt a hell of a fool. He felt that he should have listened rather more carefully to a number of things he had heard said, phrases that now pounded around his mind as his feet pounded onward to the point where he would inevitably release the ball to the cricket robot, who would inevitably strike it. He remembered Hector saying, "Have I failed? Failure doesn't bother me." He remembered the account of Hector's dying words. What's done is done. I have fulfilled my function. He remembered Hector saying that he had managed to make a few things. He remembered the sudden movement in his tote bag that had made him grip it tightly to himself when he was in the dust cloud. He remembered that he had traveled back in time a couple of days to come to Lord's again. He also remembered that he wasn't a very good bowler. He felt his arm coming round, gripping tightly into the ball that he now knew for certain was the supernova bomb, which Hector had built himself and planted on him, the bomb which would cause the universe to come to an abrupt and premature end. He hoped and prayed that there wasn't an afterlife. Then he realized there was a contradiction involved there and merely hoped that there wasn't an afterlife. He would feel very, very embarrassed meeting everybody. He hoped that his bowling was as bad as he remembered it to be, because that seemed to be the only thing now standing between this moment and universal oblivion. He felt his legs pounding. He felt his arm coming around. He felt his feet connecting with the airline bag he'd stupidly left lying on the ground in front of him. He felt himself falling heavily forward, but having his mind so terribly full of other things at this point, he completely forgot about hitting the ground and didn't. Still holding the ball firmly in his right hand, he soared up into the air, whimpering with surprise. He wheeled and whirled through the air, spinning out of control. He twisted down toward the ground, flinging himself hectically through the air, at the same time hurling the bomb harmlessly off into the distance. He hurled toward the astounded robot from behind, and still had its multifunctional battle club raised, but had suddenly been deprived of anything to hit. With a sudden mad outburst of strength, he wrestled the battle club from the grip of the startled robot, executed a dazzling banking turn in the air, hurled backwards down in a furious power dive, and with one crazy swing knocked the robot's head from the robot's shoulders. "Are you coming now?" said Ford. That's a good place to stop.